lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today, I have a very special guest. I have artist Ron Frenz with me. He's done a ton of titles at Marvel that I'm just a huge fan of. Spider-Man being one of them. Gonna get into a lot of that stuff. So welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. So, I always like, and I say this at every interview, it's the same opening thing. I always like to hear how people's start in comics began, in terms of like your fandom, and then in turn, how you decided to make that jump into being a professional.
Well, for me, it's a little hard to address any kind of real specifics because I was very, very young.
Mm-hmm.
The first comic book, I have a brother that's 3 years older, Randall, and the first comic book we remember being in the house was a 1964 issue of World's Finest. So I only would have been 4 years old. He would have been 7. So obviously he was responsible for it being there.
Yeah.
And I've drawn my entire life. I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't trying to draw. And the comics naturally appealed to me like the Sunday comics did, as a visual medium and trying to copy the pictures and everything. So from very early on, like the age of 6 or 7, after I had discovered the Spider-Man cartoon and the Spider-Man comic book, if you asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, it was I wanted to grow up and work for Marvel Comics and draw Spider-Man. So being directed at that young an age, I got there. I made choices that got me there. I went to a Vo-Tech the last 2 years of high school for half a day every day to learn commercial art. That led to a half scholarship to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh for 2 years. And I never lost the idea that I wanted to take all this training and funnel it into comics. So at the end, towards the end of my tenure at the Art Institute, Jim Shooter, who is also from Pittsburgh, did a shop appearance at a local comic shop, and myself and some others, we showed him some samples. He was very positive about it. He took Xeroxes of my samples and took them to New York. About a year later, in the meantime, I'd gotten a job at a small animation studio in Pittsburgh that did local and regional television spots, as well as the Creepshow animation and the Running Down the Dream video for Tom Petty. Some jobs like that had more notice. I worked there for a year when I got the call from Marvel, and for the next, I don't know, year or 2 years, I did both. I worked days at the studio, and my boss at the studio, a gentleman named Rick Catazone, was very, very kind. And if we weren't busy with animation work, he didn't mind if I worked on my Marvel stuff. So I did both for a while, through Kesar the Savage and Star Wars and Marvel Team Up, until I was offered the Amazing Spider-Man for 6 months. And at that point, I figured, okay, I've made an impression on Marvel. I think it might be safe to go to comics full time. And at that point, I left the studio and started doing comics full time. And the rest, as they say, is history. I was gainfully employed with Marvel for 30 some years, some of it being on contract, which was great. But for the most part, I've survived as a freelancer. So.
Yeah, I mean, like you talk Spider-Man, like you were only supposed to be on for 6 months, which is crazy because you ended up staying on for a while after that.
It was about 2.5 years, and it ended badly because of editorial had shifted and opinions had changed, and it was a mess. But initially I was spelling John Romita Jr., who was going to stay on as the regular penciler, but he left for 6 months because he had also accepted X-Men, and he was going to get X-Men on schedule and then do both. If you can imagine that, he was going to do Spider-Man and X-Men for Marvel. I mean, the closest thing I could think of was when Keith Pollard back in the 70s was doing layouts for both Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. And then there was a Thor run in there somewhere too, so there are these exceptional people that can swing that. It's incredible to me, you'd be doing 2 super major titles like that,
Yeah.
But that was the original plan. And when he, the story I heard from Danny Fingeroth, the editor at the time, was that JR came into the office at one point and realized that Danny was happy with what we were doing, and he said, just give it to him. And the first time I met JR at a convention, I shook his hand and thanked him for my run on Spider-Man, because apparently he was the guy that gave the nod, and we made it semi-permanent until a new editor came in. So
Yeah.
you know, what are you going to do? Ultimately, we were actually technically, well, not technically, any way you want to look at it, DeFalco and I were fired off of Spider-Man by Jim Owsley, who has since changed his name and is a very accomplished writer.
Well, yeah, I didn't know all that history about you guys getting fired off. I think that's really cool though, that JR was like, no, let him. But you don't hear that. I've never really heard that kind of a story in comics where somebody's like, no, he can keep Spider-Man. Like, where I've never, like, that's pretty crazy to kind of.
It's amazing how often it happens though. I mean, as freelancers, we're kind of hardwired. I'm sure there are some competitive guys out there that would stab you in the back for a gig. But for the most part, in my experience, most freelancers know how tough it is. And, you know, he was going to be doing X-Men. He had more work than he could possibly handle comfortably. So he was very magnanimous. There's no doubt about it. It was a very generous move. But, you know, the closest example I can think of is during the MC2 stuff, I was sharing studio space with Patrick Olive, who was doing Spider-Girl, and I was doing A Next. And now I chose to do A Next because Thunderstrike was the character that was involved in that, and we knew Pat would be perfect for Spider-Girl. But then A Next was canceled after a year, and he was still doing Spider-Girl, and God love him, he was doing excellent work. And then ultimately, the reason he left Spider-Girl was because he was offered other work by high profile people at the time at Marvel, who are no longer there. And he took it because Spider-Girl was due to be canceled, was scheduled to be canceled. That was one of the many times it was going to be canceled. They brought me in to do like the last 4 to 6 issues just to finish the run, which I was thankful for that because I needed to work at the time. And then they didn't cancel the book. That was one of the times the book didn't get canceled. And I said, so you're going to get Pat Olive back, right? But he was gainfully employed on other titles. And I called him and I said, no, come on back. Just come back and do Spider-Girl. And he said, Ron, I got work. He's hoping it can parlay into other things. You know, we're fine. We're good. And so I was on Spider-Girl. He was doing the other work. And then his other work dried up. And, you know, I mean, so it happens that way a lot, that, you know, you feel like, oops, you know, maybe that wasn't my best call. But you also, again, I'm not going to try to lay that there's some kind of brotherhood on you or anything, because I don't know that for a fact. Right. But I do know that most of the freelancers I've met, we know what it's like, and you know, you tend to just shake their hand and are happy for them that they have work, you know, and that's the way it works, you know, that's the way it goes. You know, as far as the firing, I mean, you can find all kinds of stories about that on I mean, Jim Owsley's blog tells his version, and it's a little one-sided.
Usually is.
Yeah, and by that I mean you can't find anybody else that can corroborate it. But you know, unfortunately, that's the version that seems to have gotten out the most, and most people tend to that becomes at least the basis for the discussion on most message boards that I've seen. You know, that kind of thing. But you know, so after I don't know, a month or so of languishing after that firing. The first I gave back a graphic novel because I just didn't feel I could serve it well. I was the original slated artist for Punisher graphic novel by Joe Duffy. It was called Assassin's Guild, I believe. Ultimately, it was done by Jorge Safino, and he did a fantastic job on it. I never could have done that level of work at that time. I still couldn't do that level of work. So he served the graphic novel very, very, very well. But it was a very brief bad time for me because my confidence was shot. So what ended up happening is Ralph Macchio offered me a couple of Thor fill-ins, and Mike Carlin called and offered me that first Superman issue with Titano. Both of them were completely in my wheelhouse. One was with John Byrne, one was with Tom DeFalco. Those two Thor fill-ins were with DeFalco, and hallelujah, I was back. I slowly got my confidence back. The two fill-ins led to us being offered Thor, and there you go. So ultimately, yes. Sometimes things fall your way, sometimes they don't. I've been blessed because when things haven't gone my way, I found somewhere else to land. You get a phone call, or you make a phone call and you find out that, oh, well, you can come over here if you want. You go, oh, thank God, and you jump over there. So that's happened to me once or twice, but overall, I've been very blessed. And then I'm going to let you ask questions instead of me rambling for an hour.
No. I mean, that's what we're here for. What nobody wants to hear me. That everybody's listening and watching because they want to.
They want your piercing, insightful questions, right?
I mean, I try to be piercing and insightful, but half the time it's me just like asking questions that I specifically want to know, and then I sprinkle that in with questions I think.
That's fine too. That's fine to pierce me. Come on, pierce me with your.
So I've noticed, right, like just in terms of like kind of researching the career, kind of watching the trajectory from like Amazing Spider-Man, which Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite characters, right? And that's kind of Spider-Girl was my introduction to your work. But I'll get to that. I just want to know from the, you growing up saying, I want to work on Spider-Man. Not many people can make that declaration when they're a kid and actually get to that point, right? And you've done some great Spider-Man stories, a couple, that stand out, obviously, like, the black costume, debut 252, but the kid who collects Spider-Man. I had not had that in my collection up until recently. And my friend Dan Gavazin, who does the Amazing Spider-Man talk, he had been talking about it with me. And I was like, I heard him talk about it on a podcast before you guys chatted about it. And I'm like, man, I have to get this. It's phenomenal. One of my favorite Spider-Man comic books I think I've ever read. And you and DeFalco, you introduced other characters and stuff too throughout your time on the book. But I was wondering, what was your favorite of the Spider-Man stories that you got to work on? What really, looking back, has continued to kind of sit with you and be like, man, I'm really proud of that particular issue or particular storyline?
Well, so much of it. I've been very fortunate in that there's very little that is seen print that I'm not happy with, that I'm not proud of. One of the ways you do that is you make sure you're always working with Tom DeFalco. So I mean, there's very little out there that I hide my face and say, yeah, I worked on it. So as far as the Spider-Girl run goes, there was, early on, there were things that I remember because Tom and I were still evolving as a team. That was the first project we worked on together as writer and penciler, and we became very close friends during the course of that. We had long conversations about our lives, but also who Peter Parker is and things like that. And so I remember the entire experience fondly for that. The kid who collects Spider-Man, of course, was Roger Stern. And that was an amazing story where, if you're friends with Dan, you've probably watched that podcast we did that went into detail about it. And as I said several times during that podcast, everybody did their best work and it all just gelled. And that doesn't always happen. There was something, there was a lightning in the bottle type of a dynamic going on there because, Terry Austin just did a fantastic job. Roger's script was incredible. Christy Shield did a fantastic job coloring it. Joe Rosen did a fantastic job lettering it. I mean, everybody was just up on their A game. And it just, to this day, it's one of those pieces that you can set aside and just say, everything worked there. Everything worked. And it did its job. It has affected hundreds of thousands of people. And You can't ask for more than that from a gig like that. As far as the work on the regular book, there were scenes I remember. There were I know one of the issues that came from a suggestion from me was literally the title of the story was my question at one point. I was talking to DeFalco and I said, "Whatever happened to Crusher Hogan?" And we built a story around that. You know, I mean, Tom did a fantastic, wonderful little human interest story around that. That was a lot of fun for me. You know, dealing with the Hobgoblin was fun. I mean, introducing the Puma, you know, co-creating the Puma, co-creating Silver Sable. The Black Fox was a fun character. You know, so Tom's edict while we were on the book, as much as I would have loved to, as a longtime Spider-Man fan, taken my shot at some of the classic villains, Tom wanted to move forward. He wanted to create new villains, and I certainly understood that. You know, when we've kind of touched back on Spider-Man together, like when we did that '96 annual, he said, "Okay, is there a classic villain you'd like to do?" And I went, "Craven." We did a Web Spinners two-parter that was an anthology that you could pick any point in Spider-Man's career. And we did something with the group we had created called the Sinister Syndicate, the grouping of bad guys that we had done. But I also got to do Doc Ock in that, which I didn't get to do during the regular run. You know, so a lot of what we've done since has been an opportunity for me to weigh in on some of the classic characters. But it was an incredibly wonderful time. I mean, there's a reason why, when given the opportunity, DeFalco and I worked together, and I mean, I can only really speak for myself, but I think I know Tom well enough that I could speak for him too, that we acknowledge that something good happens when we're working together. I respect his input, he respects my input, and we enjoy each other's company and work. And I think it comes through on the page. I think if the creators are having fun, if the creators are engaged and love the characters, then I think it comes through for the readers, you know.
I completely agree, and that kind of like was going to lead me into like what I wanted to talk about next. Like you and DeFalco, just the synergy of creativity between you guys it's evident in every book that you guys do together. You know, you had your Spider-Man, you did Thor, and like I said, Spider-Girl was my introduction. And you know, Mayday Parker, like I loved that book. I absolutely loved that book from the beginning, from that What If issue that I had to get in the reprint of Spider-Girl Zero that they did, because What If is too, that was a little bit higher for me at the time to buy when I was a kid, but you know, all the way until it ended. And like you said, it kept getting canceled and kept getting brought back. I've never seen that since I started reading comic books till today. I've never seen a series have such a huge fan base to where the publisher had no choice but to listen. So I would love to kind of pick your brain a little bit about that, of the creation of Spider-Girl. And you know, you even saying like you left the book because you did A next, which I picked up all the MC2 stuff. I love that stuff. And then coming back to the book, you know, after Patrick Olive left.
Yeah, well, he's definitely a tough act to follow. The creation of Spider-Girl was, I don't know where it actually was in the timeline. There were a couple of times that I asked for permission to work on an extra project with DC because I was overdoing Superman.
Right.
And I believe that was one of the times that I had to ask for special permission to go ahead and do an extra job. And it was What If Spider-Man had a Spider-Girl, you know, because that was, you know, Tom worked on the Clone Saga, and that was what was going on during the Clone Saga, was MJ's pregnancy. So he found himself daydreaming about, what if we would have pulled the trigger on that? What if they would have had a girl and named her May, and now she's a teenager, you know? And he rang me up and asked if I was interested in working on it with him. And I said, absolutely, because any opportunity to work with Tom, I'll take it. And it was fun to create it. I did some character sketches and Normie's, you know, young Norman's tattoos, and older Pete and older Mary Jane and all this. I did all these sketches for it. And I mean, I laugh about it because my biggest contribution to the entire thing was I came up with the nickname Mayday. which was just stolen from Cheers. If you if you
Yeah.
watch Cheers, it was Sam Mayday Malone was his name, and it just occurred to me, as you know, when I was doing the basketball scene and trying to come up with a chant from the audience and everything. It just occurred to me to just, let's swipe that. Her name is May. She's a basketball high school star, and so they call her Mayday. And Tom loved it, so we ran with it. But we plotted it as if it were a pilot for a new series. Tom and I were emotionally and professionally, we were kind of positioned to kind of imagine that Spider-Girl was a sequel. That okay, we did Spider-Man in the 80s. Let's say the book was canceled when we left the book, and now they're reviving the series. We're doing a next generation thing, and they've got the original creators back together, and we built on that concept. But we did it. When I say we did it as a pilot, I mean we created a supporting cast as you would for a series, as far as like people who would contribute to some reflection of who the lead character is. We came up with a dynamic that I loved, which was that May was popular with everybody. I mean, she was smart, and she was an A student, so she hung around with the smart kids, and they loved her, Courtney and Jimmy, and then she was also playing basketball, so she was also popular with the jocks because of her natural physicality. Now her powers kicked in during the course of that first story to more of a degree, but I love the idea that she was as much Mary Jane's kid as she was Pete's, and that so that we gave her this opportunity. Her life was divided. She was always having to choose between the jocks and the nerds and all this, and when she discovered her legacy as Spider-Girl, it became the synthesis of the two. She could finally use both sides of her personality without feeling like she was compromising anything. She had to use her totality as Spider-Girl, and that message and that dynamic, it was something you didn't normally see. And I don't mean to criticize anybody else that worked on What If, because I worked on a couple of What If stories that were incredible tearjerkers by Peter Gillis, and some of the stories that were done were terrific. But I mean, it had also gotten to a point where there was a long run of What If that it was like, well, basically the story happens the same way, except this time everybody dies, that kind of thing. And it became more of a video game mentality, where it was the shock value of watching these scenes play out, where people get decimated instead of surviving, that kind of thing. And it got a little lazy sometimes with some writers. And DeFalco was determined to try to change that and get back to the idea of writing from the characters. And Spider-Girl was definitely one of those stories that was written with a knowledge of who Peter Parker is, with a knowledge of who Mary Jane Watson Parker is, and who their daughter might be. And so it struck a chord. I mean, it didn't sell like Amazing Fantasy 15 sold, but it did sell better than other What Ifs at the time. So at one point, DeFalco was at Marvel, and the editor-in-chief at the time, Bob Harris, approached him and said, so I understand you and Ron Frenz have a pitch for a Spider-Girl series. And Tom said, no. What? And he said, well, there's all these sketches that Frenz did. I mean, this is a pitch for a series, right? And he goes, no, that's just Ron being Ron. He just did those for the single issue. And he went, really? But he said at the time, and this is always interesting to me because it never happened, so I don't know how much people realize this. The original pitch for MC2 was it was going to be 3 comics in a bag for major distributors like Walmart and Sam's Club and things like that. It was going to be like the old Whitman three comic samplers in a bag. So they wanted 3 titles. And they wanted something that would be easily accessible to a new audience. You know, they didn't want to package up their own books because they were realizing at the time that Spider-Man, X-Men, all these books had very, very continuity heavy things going on, and they realized that it might be hard to capture new readers with that. And the whole point of this was an outreach to new readers.
Mhm.
So that's why MC2 was created. That's why A-Next and J2 and Spider-Girl were created and executed, were to go into these 3-packs. That never happened because nobody told people on the Marvel sales side that they were supposed to be selling these things as a completely separate entity. So the fact that they survived at all on the regular newsstand, in the regular comic shops, was miraculous to us. You know, even the fact that A-Next went for a year. You know, the original plan was to publish the first raft of titles, I believe, for like a year, and then do another sampling of titles so that there would be variety in these comic packs, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
But the fact that Spider-Girl survived as long as she did at all on the regular comic book racks of comic book shops, it was never intended to serve that audience. What we found with Spider-Girl was that we hit that sweet spot where the older readers loved the fact that Pete was aging with them, and the younger readers loved the idea of a teenage superhero that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, waking up in the morning and finding out your dad was Spider-Man, you know, that kind of thing. And so the younger readers were really relating to Mayday, and the older readers were relating to Pete and Mary Jane being older in these stories and being parents in these stories. And we hit a sweet spot that just kept going. As far as the fans, they were invaluable. Meeting Spider-Girl fans is very flattering because they're all smart, caring people. I mean, I've never met, literally never met a Spider-Girl fan that went, boy, she had a nice ass, you know, or anything. It seemed to be, you know, because you can meet Wolverine fans that are like, I like that he slaughters people. You know, I'm a big Punisher fan. You're going like, ooh, I don't want you liking it for that reason, you know, that kind of thing. I've never met a Spider-Girl fan who liked the series for the wrong reasons, you know. I know one in particular that kept bugging us to say, when's she going to go to college? I'm going, never. As far as we're concerned, she's never going to go to college. So calm down, you know, that kind of thing. And there was only one time in one of our the only fill-in issue that Tom DeFalco did not script was the only issue, the only time that, and it wasn't done, it wasn't incredibly provocative or anything, but they showed Mayday in the shower. And it was only done once by a completely fill-in crew, by a fill-in writer and a fill-in artist. And, you know, we had nothing to do with it. And it was, and our fans kind of went, what the hell is that? Because she was, I mean, she was only 15, 16 during the run of the strip. I mean, we showed her Sweet 16 party, you know. So, you know, Pat was very concerned when he came on the book, and I completely agreed with him that, you know, we wanted to be careful about that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, he grew up with a sister, I grew up with a sister. I mean, we weren't interested in exploiting her femininity in the same way that they did with the X-Men female characters and things like that. I mean, in fact, we wanted to be sure we didn't do that as much as possible. And so I don't think there was anybody reading the book for that reason at all. At one point, I even approached Adam Hughes as if I had the power. I approached Adam Hughes at a convention and said, "You're not looking for any regular cover gigs, are you? Because we really could have used something to help, you know, raise the profile of the book." And I figured, well, you know, get some Adam Hughes covers in there. And DC was using them that way a lot, you know, that they were.
Yeah.
I know I bought a lot of books for some gorgeous Adam Hughes covers that he didn't do the interior on, you know, that kind of thing. So I figured, you know, maybe we could do that. But I mean, we weren't even at that point. Marvel, they have budgets for each title, and Spider-Girl was never budgeted for that kind of splurge, that kind of thing. Not that Adam had the time anyway. He was, he was flattered I asked, but no, he just didn't have the time. So that was the closest I ever came to exploiting her, femininity, maybe to try to help the sales. But for the most part, we drew her like she was a teenage girl, and yes, she was wearing a skin tight costume, but we never played with, we never wanted to dance that close to that fire. I mean, it just was anathema to us.
Yeah, I think the thing that I loved about it was that it was just good superhero comics that dealt with like that mix of like the slice of life stuff, kind of, like the good character moments that I felt at the time you weren't getting a ton of. It stood out of the pack to me. You know what I mean? Like,
well, unfortunately, comics kind of go through cycles, and we were finding years later with Spider-Girl, we were finding that the same thing was happening that happened with Thunderstrike, which was people were reacting incredibly positively to the supporting characters, to the subplots, to the private life stuff and how it related to the superhero stuff. And I think that really helps. It's become a cliche in comics, but it really plays to the reader being able to relate to the characters. And if the reader doesn't relate to the characters, then they don't care about what happens to the characters. And then what happens is it just becomes like a video game, and not even a good video game. It becomes a video game where you don't care what happens to anybody. You just want to see a lot of explosions, and you want to see a lot of people fighting a lot of people. And those are not the kind of comics that have ever been of any interest to me or to DeFalco. And, so we kept doing what we were doing. But I wanted to address the fans what the fans did right. And they're, like I said, the smart people. They never wrote to Marvel and complained and say, don't cancel our book and how dare you and all that stuff. They started a campaign where they created their own flyers. They bought their own ads in Preview magazine to tell the retailers, this is a book that will get support if you carry it. That we guarantee you, if you carry this book, we'll support it. It has, here we are. We're the fans of this book. We will continue to buy this book. You need to continue to carry it. And it worked. I mean, because the reason that book wasn't canceled, the reason that it would be, like the rumor would be that it was going to be canceled, or the announcement would be made that it was going to be canceled, is that the terrible truth about publishing is that, like so many things in this world, it's about projection. Okay, it's about, okay, here's your first issue, you sold this number of books, your sales are going to go down from there. People are going to be curious, they're going to buy here. The second issue will do this, the third issue will do this, and by the time we get out to like the sixth issue or the 12th issue, you're done. Marvel was constantly looking at the sales figures on Spider-Girl and saying, okay, they're gonna start going down. And originally, they said that, I forget what the first period of time was, and like whether it was 13 issues or 30 issues or whatever it was. DeFalco likes to say any issue that ended with a big splash page of Spider-Girl was going to be a last issue. So if you want to go back and look through the run, you can see how many times it almost happened. But the problem with Marvel's projections was that Spider-Girl I'd see if I can do it on screen here, just stayed steady. It was the steady eddy of comics. The sales never really, occasionally would spike up if we did something like bringing Hobgoblin in or something like that, but they never went down. They just stayed level. We never met the projection of the sales department that you're going to be cancelable in 6 issues, or so we kept getting reprieves, and most of the time those reprieves were, you're doing another 6 issues. Occasionally, what happened when we started doing the digests, when they started reprinting the Spider-Girl stuff in the digest form, they were selling like hotcakes, to use an old term, in schools. A lot of kids were discovering the strip, and a lot of girls were discovering the strip as these digests, and they were selling like crazy. And we were told at that point on the book, this was after Pat had left and I was already installed as the regular guy. We were told that as long as these digests are selling so well, you guys got a job, because we're going to need new material for the digests, So our regular newsstand sales plus the digest sales, you're fine. You don't have to worry about it. Then Scholastic, the outfit that was distributing those, contacted Marvel, and they recognized that they were selling really well, so they decided they wanted a bigger cut of the sales of these digests, and Marvel said no, and the digest went away, and we weren't long for the world after that. We went back to, you get another 6 issues, you get another 6 issues. I mean, the last attempt was at 100. We were canceled at 100, but that was in anticipation of a relaunch. We weren't allowed to say that at the time. They wanted to make it look like it was yet another, fan demand thing, but it wasn't. It was totally planned as a relaunch to try to spike the numbers, and we ran, what did we run? We ran 3 years, almost 3 years with the amazing brand.
Yeah, I think like 30 issues or so, right?
Yeah, 30 issues. And then it went into the anthologies, and we got maybe another year or so of stories out of the anthologies. And, it was a beautiful run. Tom and Pat and Al Williamson did an incredible run of books. Sal came in and started doing some inking over Pat and inked a couple of my fill-ins. And so when Al Williamson finally decided it was time to retire, Sal was there to step in. And, Tom, Sal, and I think we did some really good, strong work. And it was a wonderful working experience. And we're very proud of the work we did, the stories we told, and when you talk to the fans that grew up with the title, it's very flattering and very humbling that this character resonated with so many people. But Ryan, I still meet people at conventions that talk about Eric Masterson and how much they love that character. He was published for 2 years back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And yet I signed stacks of books all the time of Thunderstrike, and people talking about he's their favorite Marvel character and all this kind of stuff, to the point that we brought Kevin. We did a 616 version of Kevin back in like 2010, 2011. We did a 5-issue miniseries with a different version of a legacy character than what we did in A Next. And it didn't sell well enough to go to series or anything, but new material is really hard sell these days. I mean, it didn't surprise us that it didn't go to series because there's so much product out there.
I know.
The cost is such that, I talk to fans all the time that say, please bring back Thunderstrike. And I said, did you read the Kevin series that we did? And they weren't even aware of it, that kind of thing. So it's a shame, but it was kind of a missed opportunity. I mean, if everybody who would have bought Thunderstrike would have been informed about the new miniseries and bought it, it probably would have been impressive numbers, because Thunderstrike wasn't canceled because of low sales numbers. Thunderstrike was caught up in that whole Ron Perlman deal, where they literally wanted to cancel half the line, thinking that the half that was left would sell twice as well. So at the time Thunderstrike was canceled, it was selling very well. So was War Machine, so was Force Works, so were a lot of titles that just fell under the axe because of this goofy idea that, cancel half the line and the half that's left will sell twice as well, which Tom DeFalco told them up front, that's not how publishing works. You're just going to cost yourself market share. And, and he proved to be right, which was a Pyrrhic victory, since he was fired for taking that stand.
Yeah, it was an interesting time in comics. I mean, that's when I started reading comics was, when I was about 4, so that was 91. That's when I got into comics.
Oh my God, you're so young.
So, like I'm not like I wouldn't say I'm a historian, but like I really love the history of comics. So like obviously I've gone back and I've done research and I've watched, like the speculator boom and how that kind of affected comics and how like comics were slashed and the whole formation of Image and them leaving and just I've just like watched the market and seen it. And now that I work in retail, I'm also seeing it's mirroring the 90s kind of with speculators again kind of making their way back in and watching books spike and then the next issue it's like, oh, there's no first appearance, so those numbers drop and just the fluctuation of stuff. And yeah, I totally agree. Like I watch, people ask me, like I'm like I don't know why there's not this character doesn't have a title. Like your guess is as good as mine, but there's 12 to 14 Batman titles, which to me doesn't make sense. Like I want to see the characters that like Green Arrow should have a title, or The Question, or like smaller characters.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's not a. I mean, a part of it I think is unfortunately the price point, but
yeah, it's so expensive.
everything is so event driven now
Yeah.
that we didn't. That's not the point. I mean, the point was back when I was lucky enough to get into the industry in the 80s when we still had regular newsstand sales. We still had spinner racks in drugstores and food stores, things like that,
Hmm.
which slowly has phased out over the course of those years, and now we're exclusively in comic shops for the most part. And some of them are incredibly well run and incredibly professional, and some of them are not. And they don't seem to even try new titles that could benefit them as product that they can move, that kind of thing, because for the most part, the people that run these shops are fans and they go with their opinions rather than the product, whether than selling the product. I mean, I've had firsthand experience. Tom DeFalco has had firsthand experience with people with those kinds of attitudes, and they're frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the price point seems to prevent people from just looking at it as serial entertainment. I mean, a monthly periodical, it used to be you told your stories, you did occasional cliffhangers, but you got the character, you got the reader interested in your character, and for me, when I was a kid and I was a Spider-Man fan, I was checking in with my friend Pete every month. See what's going on with Peter Parker, what's going on with Steve Rogers, that kind of thing. And that's the way they were handled, and they were structured to bring you back every month. But back then I started at 12 cents, and then they went to 15 and 20 and 30 and $1 at one point. Oh my God, who's gonna, that kind of thing. Now they're talking about kicking a regular sized Batman book up to like $7 or something like that. That's nuts. I mean, but again, everything's become event driven. It leads you into the next event. If something big doesn't happen, if you don't throw the entire origin of the character into doubt for your 6-issue arc, then nobody cares, and it's like that's. I mean, nobody can maintain that kind of heat from issue, because I know DC and Marvel have both been guilty of like rolling. You read one of these big mega events, but they don't really end. They just kind of roll into the next big mega event, that kind of thing. And it's like, you're not fooling anybody. You're not fooling anybody.
Yeah.
It's not a crime to end a story. Avengers Endgame proved that. You're allowed to end a story and people will appreciate that and still come back to see the beginning of the next one if you did your job right. But people also want to feel completion occasionally.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, the gentleman I'm working for now with sitcomics, with binge books, this issue that's coming out August 4th of the Heroes Union
Yeah.
is 60 some pages for $4.99. Now, at some point, he may have to go to $5.99, but you're still talking about 3 times the material for the same price of what you're getting for other comics right now. You know, you're guaranteed a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're guaranteeing 3 times the story content for the same price. You know, hopefully, like I said, August 4th, we're going to be coming out through Diamond for the first time, and there's going to be a whole bunch of titles that are going to be available over the course of the next several months. And you know, I hope that the fans react to it, because packaging, I think, just in my limited opinion, packaging has been one of our problems from day one. Because when magazines started rising in price around comics with the newsstand, which became the problem with the regular newsstand, is we weren't charging enough for our comics for a lot of newsstand people to bother carrying them. They weren't getting a return on their dollar for the space that they were using to present comics. Okay, rather than adapting our format, you know, rather than going to a larger magazine size, or you know, putting in more content and raising the price point, or you know, there were some attempts at that kind of thing. But rather than doing that, we decided we'd take the sweeter deal of just going into the specialty stores. And the specialty stores were a great idea as long as there are really smart people running your specialty stores. But you know, can you think of any other product under the sun that relies on independent retailers to carry your stuff and bring it to the public? You know, and it wasn't a great long-term solution, because how many people do you meet in a day, even with the Marvel movies being as popular as they are, that will still very casually say, "You work in comics? I didn't even know they published those anymore." And one of the reasons is they're not ubiquitous. They're not out, and you don't see them unless you go into a comic book store. You don't see comic books being sold anywhere. That's why John Q. Public doesn't know that we're still publishing comic books. You know, there's no national advertising for them. The books themselves, you know, even the movies themselves don't help advertise the books or anything. You know, I mean, remember the old George Reeves Superman series? At the end of it, it said Superman is a character appearing in Superman magazine. And, you know, there was always some mention made of the fact that these were periodicals you could go to the newsstand and buy. With all of the success of the Marvel movies, there's nothing like that. There's, you know, Robert Downey Jr., God love him. Chris Evans, God love him. I mean, I love all these guys. I'm a fan too. But, you know, Chris Hemsworth isn't coming in at the end of the movie going, "Oh, and you know, you can find the Adventures of Thor every month on the newsstand." Fan, yeah. You know, that nobody's doing that. You know, I mean, and thus we are where we are. You know, thus the comics become R&D for the movies, but very little else. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I discovered comics not from a comic book store. It was probably at the grocery store or at the stand, you know, and I think it's you know, and yeah, the price point, I get it. But like if they create something that is, you know, maybe for that market. I know that DC tried to do it with Walmart, and I know a lot of like retailers are pissed, and I know some fans are like, why do I have to go to Walmart to get this book? But I do think that if they create a cheaper price point to where like you're in the store and it's not like a $14 because magazines are crazy right now how much
they are. Oh,
I'm blown away.
No doubt.
You know, so I've often said, like, I don't understand. Archie seems to be doing just fine. You go into a store and you see Archie Digest everywhere. You know?
Yeah, you do. I don't know how just fine they're doing.
Well, I mean, I'm saying,
but I understand what you're saying. People still know they exist. Yeah,
right. You know, so I think that Marvel and DC they should have a place in markets, and they should have a place on newsstands and in drugstores, and like maybe, you know, create a line of books that's specific for that. Then, because I think that it is how people discover it.
Right? Well, like for one thing, at the time, and this was 20 years ago anyway, when the first Spider-Man movies were coming out, you know, it occurred to me, why not do something for the newsstand that's a magazine size? Because they do it, the thing they were doing for the newsstand was for little kids. It had like puzzles and all kinds of stuff like that, little thing, but it was obviously targeted at early school kids or preschool kids. But why not do a magazine that in reprints. You're not losing any money on a reprint. But you know, like when the first Spider-Man movies were coming out, he was rooming with Harry. Green Goblin was a thing, you know. So you had a whole bunch of stories in the '60s where Pete and Harry were rooming together, and you know, Mary Jane was in the stories and all this kind of stuff that reflected the movie somewhat. Okay, so why not put together a magazine where you reprint that stuff in full color and put a Tobey Maguire picture on the cover and run a couple of articles that you know, an interview with Kirsten Dunst and you know, all this kind of stuff, and put it on the newsstand. And the movie was huge. I mean, people pick it up because it's got Spider-Man on the cover. They flip through it, they see it's Spider-Man comics. They go, oh, okay, there's Spider-Man comics, and it doesn't matter what year they're from. It doesn't matter, you know, even as a historian, even as you're interested in history, you're connecting the movie to the comics that were the, you know, the inspiration for it. How is that a bad thing? You know, and I never saw any product like that at all. When, you know, even when the first X-Men movie came out, you know, I mean, Hugh Jackman looked like Logan, for God's sakes. They did the hair, they did everything. Put out a magazine that runs some of the old John Buscema Wolverine stories and put a picture of him on the cover. You know, I mean, and a lot of it has to do with licensing and who has rights to what version and all this. And it's nuts to me because, you know, one feeds the other, and you know, whether it's through concept or whatever, you know, the comics are still feeding the movies, and the movies are not feeding the comics, unfortunately. So you know, sooner or later, you know, that's going to show. That imbalance is going to show.
Yeah, hopefully, you know, I don't know. I mean, I know that I'm sure I'm not the only person to think about it. I'm sure that they've thought of opportunities, but I just think that you have $1 billion movies. I'm not saying it should turn into a $1 billion comic book industry, but there should be some crossover in terms of the people that go to the movies and turn those people into comic book readers. Right. You know what I mean? Like there's even this opportunity.
Yeah. I've seen local shop owners take the opportunity that when there's a Marvel movie out, they have they make a deal with the theater manager, and they have a display in the lobby of, you know, did you enjoy the latest Avengers movie? Right down the road and turn left, and you can, you know, read the monthly adventures of and they put a display in a case and have the comics available and a little map to where their store is and stuff. But that's individual shop owners. That's not some kind of a national situation, you know, where, you know, I mean, because that's the other thing too. I mean, some of the creators are invited to these premieres, but nobody's sticking a camera in their face. Nobody's I mean, I love these gentlemen, so please do not take this in any way as a slight against them. But I know that Dave Michelinie was at the Ant-Man premiere, you know, and because he created Scott Lang and everything, and you know, but E Entertainment didn't put a camera in his face and ask him, you know, who he was and why he was there and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, I mean, Stan became the figurehead for all of us, you know, and that's swell, but you know, that's not the truth of it. And it doesn't, there is nothing out there communicating the fact that there is still an Iron Man comic being published, that there is still a Thor comic being published, that there is still, you know, an Avengers comic being published. You know, none of that is part of the regular conversation anymore. I mean, people can enjoy Iron Man as a movie character, and they might believe that there hasn't been an Iron Man comic since the 70s. What do they care?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they might if they knew that there was even if they knew that the Tony Stark character in the comics has slowly, well, not so slowly, over the last 10 years, become more like Robert Downey Jr., you know, because he wasn't before that. He was a stiff before that. Right. But I mean, a lot of the characters have been adapted to some degree to look a little bit more like their movie counterparts and to act a little bit more like their movie counterparts. But if the people that are going to see the movies don't know that, what difference does it make? You know, all you're doing is pissing off the comic fans who want them to look like the comic version, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a topic that comes up often in terms of like with friends that read comic books or people I talk to on the channel. My only hope is that they could somehow figure it out. But
yeah, it's way above my pay grade.
Yeah.
I mean, most of what I've talked about here, I'm sure Tom DeFalco could come here and tell you, you know, chapter and verse why no, that wouldn't work because of this, and that wouldn't work because of that. So I'm talking out my ass. I mean, I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form. I have spent 30 some years in this industry desperately avoiding anything involving the business end of it. So
well, yeah, I mean, you're doing the creative part, and that's what we love about your stuff. And I want to talk about your new project that you, like you said, is coming August 4th, the Heroes Union. I want to hear a little bit about the story, a little bit about how that project came about, and kind of what we can all expect with the book.
oh, now you want to?
Yeah, now.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it's a new outfit. A gentleman named Darren Henry contacted me a few years ago now, because we've been test marketing these books in Central PA and a few shops around the country. And the point now is that we will finally be available through Diamond distribution to every comic shop. So the books have been out there slowly building a groundswell, and we've never gotten a bad review, which is great. So here's hoping. But we're launching the line with the first issue of the Heroes Union, which is, I trust you and I trust your audience to be intelligent people. It's the gathering of their lead characters. So it would be the binge book Justice League or Avengers or something like that. 2 or 3 of these characters will have their own title, but you know, this is a standalone story in that you don't need any other background on these characters. The entree character is a speedster named Startup, who has been invited to join the Heroes Union. So you meet the rest of the Heroes Union through her, and they go on a mission together. It's a science fiction story. It's co-plotted by Darren Henry and Roger Stern, and scripted by Roger Stern. And working with Roger again was a pure pleasure. It always is, because you never get a bad story out of Roger Stern. So that was cool. All of the binge book characters are modern superheroes. Darren's background is in TV writing, sitcoms for the most part. And he's a terrific writer with a very fresh voice. And he was a fan of Marvel in the 70s. That was his sweet spot, you know, when he was growing up. And he initially wanted to hire Sal Buscema to develop these characters with him. And at that point, Sal was pretty much retired from penciling, from dealing with the blank page and storytelling. So we were working together on Spider-Girl, or had just finished working together on Spider-Girl. So Sal said, you know, I'm not penciling anymore, but if you get Ron Frenz to pencil it, I'll be happy to ink it, you know, that kind of thing. From what I understand, Darren had seen Spider-Girl, you know, my work with Sal on Spider-Girl, and we proceeded to start designing and developing these characters together. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. You know, I mean, there's one of the characters is Blue Baron, who is a legacy character, who's almost 300 years old, from the period of the Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. Is he immortal, or isn't he? There's the character Startup that I talked about. There's character Bull. I mean, there's a lot of. They're not all based on like, this is our, you know, even though there's a speedster. You know, even though Startup has super speed, she's okay. If you're going to go, she's our Flash. You're not going to find our Wonder Woman or our super. It's not as simple as that. You know, Darren is not creating just other versions of existing archetypes. He's finding. It's a lot like you know, trying to find why were those characters archetypes then, and what would be the corresponding archetype now? You know, it's all very fresh and very modern in its approach to these characters, and even the collective universe of these characters is a really fresh take on what the world would be like if superheroes were real. You
Okay.
know, where the kids are, there's like a fantasy superhero league where the kids, like with sports, where the kids pick they have their superhero representative, and when the news is reporting on the last fight between the good guys and the bad guys, you get credit for whether or not your hero had a win or whether he had a dropout or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's this kind of engagement from the kids of this world and the general public of this world, where that's the kind of thing that fascinates Darren, is how would this impact, how would these, I mean, because again, with the heroes, it's the heroes union, because we don't leave a question as to whether or not they get a stipend. We don't leave it a question as to whether or not they get a share of licensing with, of their of them. If startup joins the union and there's startup t-shirts, she gets a cut, that kind of thing. It's all part of joining the heroes union, that kind of thing. So why wouldn't you? That kind of thing. And I love it. I mean, I've been in comics for a long time, and Darren's approach and his everything from his dialogue to he's not jaded. He's not comics jaded. Okay. The best way to describe it is when we went to design the characters. Okay. If he would have just said, all right, Ron, here's what I'm looking for. Go ahead and design it for me. I have my ticks. I have things that I have my go-to things. I actually, all my career, my professional career, I've had this secret weapon. This friend of mine from art school, who doesn't design things the same way I do. And quite often, if I was designing a character for MC2 or for Thor or whatever, I would approach him and say, can you give me some thoughts on paper? And that would keep me from getting stale. That would keep everything I designed from looking the same. Mm-hmm. With Darren, I don't have to worry about that, because Darren will send me, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Can you do, and he sends me these photographs off the internet, can you do something with these boots and maybe a helmet kind of like this? And I'm thinking like maybe a design like this on the tights or on the bodysuit, and he just sends me all this disparate reference, and he says, do you think you can do something with this? And that becomes my job, is to do something to synthesize what he has given me and try to make it look like it was a deliberate character that grew out of all of this different reference. And it's a fantastic creative exercise. I mean, when it works, it's incredible. Even when it doesn't work, that was a lot of fun. Wah, wah, wah. It didn't work, but okay. It was still fun to do, and it keeps me fresh after all these years in the industry. You're not going to get a design stamp that suddenly everybody starts looking like it was designed by Ron Frenz, that kind of thing. And I love it. I love the fact that it makes me look fresh and new as a daisy, and we've come up with some really interesting looking characters that, some of them have, versions of things you can buy off the rack that, modern day superheroes would actually use. And some of it's just inspired design, that off of, I can't even begin to tell you some of the stuff that Darren has sent me that he has inspired him. He says, it might just be a photo of a solar flare or something, well, on Startup, he sent me this picture of a motion wave. Mm-hmm. That it was like a scientific photo that somehow they captured what a motion wave looks like. Okay. And it had like this pattern to it. And we were able to take that and use the first S shape for Startup's logo for her design. So she has this really cool, unique design coming across her chest. These two lines, one comes in here, one comes in here, and they meet and they kind of draw this motion line that,
awesome.
it's actually from something that Darren sent me, that we said, can we do something with this? Without turning it into just an S, can we do something with it? And it's just a very creative time, very fun stuff. And it's all ages comics. It's not grim and gritty. Darren's background in sitcoms guarantees that it has that balance of recognizing the absurdity of some of these situations, and again, as a jaded comics reader, I've laughed out loud several times at his scripts, because he's great at pointing out, how, just in the same way that let's say the Marvel movies do it, that they will occasionally take a moment, and some diehard fans don't like it, but the general public loves it when the characters take a second to recognize how bizarre this situation is, right? That's one of my favorite scenes in Age of Ultron, where Hawkeye and the Scarlet Witch are in the room together, and he's saying, the city is flying, we're fighting an army of robots, and I have a bow and arrow. None of this makes any sense, that kind of thing. But that made Marvel. That's what Stan Lee brought to the game back in the day. That tongue-in-cheek occasional wink that, wouldn't this be weird if this stuff was really happening? And Darren has a wonderful sense of that he is passing on to other writers. And I think it's a wonderfully fresh take that, he's got Dave Michelinie doing some work for him. He's got Roger Stern doing some work for him. He's got Tom DeFalco doing some work for him. He's had Todd DeZago do some work for him. These guys are being motivated by something other than a paycheck. They get hit up all the time to do work for young publishers, but there's something in what Darren is showing them and what Darren is reaching for that is appealing to these gentlemen. And they're signing on for that reason. That's why I signed on. I mean, I get hit up all the time to, help me design my universe. And that's the other thing I appreciate about Darren, is that he is letting it grow organically. He's not just saying, here's, 15 titles with a universe of superheroes and all this. He's actually planning on doing humor titles and a horror anthology and all this kind of stuff, along with some superhero titles that will grow organically, and you will encounter these characters in the order you're supposed to encounter them. And if you meet them first in Heroes Union, you'll be getting more background on these characters. If you actually were one of the people that saw the test marketing and have been following the books up to this point, the Heroes Union will be a little bit of a flashback, a little bit of a background on a lot of what you've been hearing people talk about in the various books. But if you read Heroes Union first, you'll know what they're talking about as you read the new titles and understand where all these characters came from. So it's really very skillfully managed and very skillfully done. So, for what it's worth, I've worked on Spider-Man, I've worked on Superman, I've worked on Thor, I've worked on Thunderstrike and characters that I've co-created with Spider-Girl. I'm very proud to be here. So for what it's worth, if it means anything, that a veteran comics guy has been re-inspired by something that might be a lot of fun to read. You might get a new favorite character out of it. Give it a shot. And the worst you're going to get is a comic that's 3 times the size of any other comic that's same price, told by trained professionals. So I guarantee it won't suck. Okay.
No, I'm very excited. I'm very excited for the book. I mean, if I wasn't before, you'd made me even more hyped for it. after hearing you talk about it. What are the goals though past Heroes Union? Are there other books that are going to be coming out in short order? Is there going to be a little bit of a gap in between? Do you know anything?
You actually may need to interview Darren Henry for some of that. As I stated earlier, I have done a pretty good job of avoiding the business side of this industry, and I've continued to I've continued to do that. I like I said, I know there are plenty of books that have been already created and have already been test marketed that will be released to the wider audience. We don't want to fool anybody. We don't want people who already have these titles to necessarily buy them again. So we'll be very upfront about that. But Heroes Union will be an ongoing, and a lot of these titles will be ongoing. And this is a great jumping on point, even if you have experienced the test marketing. And I really don't know how wide the test marketing was. Like I said, we've been very fortunate. We've had it because they were available through Comixology initially.
Okay.
And we got a lot of reviews based on that. I believe they've since been they're no longer available through Comixology in the hopes that people will be interested in buying the printed matter through Diamond. So we were pushing it pretty heavy on Facebook and on social media. I've been doing a lot of these podcasts talking about it. Darren actually hired a public relations firm, a very professional public relations firm. So I've been doing my share of interviews and podcasts specifically through them. That I'm a little weary of it, to tell you the truth, Ryan. It's been you're going to be my last one for a while, and it's been a lot of fun. But if I look exhausted at all, that might be one of the reasons. But it's worth it because it's fun comics at a time where I think we need some fun comics. I mean, not to say that the heroes don't have feet of clay and that there isn't drama involved. There's a lot of it, but it's not Invincible and it's not The Boys. It's Marvel movies. It's trying to capture that sense of all ages enjoyment and adventure that the Marvel movies capture so well. So I would love for everybody to at least give it a shot. And if it's not your cup of tea, it's not your cup of tea. But again, you have you've taken a shot. It's only the cost of one book. You get a whole story, 60 some pages. And if you really hate it, I'm sure the paper is recyclable. So you're helping the environment too. And if you're within sound of my voice and you don't think I'm a complete ass, give it a shot. August 4th will be in comic shops.
I'm very, very excited. I didn't even know that this book was being test marketed. This was somebody came in the shop and asked for it. I was like, wait, what? And he listed off the creators. I'm like, what do you?
Well, the books that have been test marketed are issues of Blue Baron and Startup Solo Book, and a book called Super Suckers, which is an Archie Comics take on vampires, which is hilarious. And there have been some other because he's marketing under Binge Books for the adventure comics and Sit Comics for the humor books. And so there have been, we have been out there circulating and we've gotten some, like I said, so far in this environment, the current comics environment, we've yet to get a really bad review. People appreciate these days the need for variety and the need for some fresh voices and the need for all ages entertainment. So, back in the early 2000s, that wasn't necessarily the case. Back in the early 2000s, everybody wanted everything to be X-Men, and if you tried to do something for a broader audience, this happened to DeFalco and I. If you tried to do something for a broader audience, people would literally say, "Who is this for?" And because if it wasn't for the die-hard, fans that desperately wanted to see Batman and Wolverine go toe to toe, then who the hell was it for? And it's like, that's kind of what's wrong with comics, is that comic fans think that they have ownership of it. And those of us who are trying to create these things, we want to welcome new people in too. We need more kids to read these books so that they can grow into adults and read different material. And the fact that the industry has just kind of adapted for the older readers who can still afford the books, we need to stop that. We need to get out of that cycle, because we're not bringing in the next generation of comics fans. So
Yeah, the gatekeepers need to calm down.
I very much so.
I see it all the time. Like I hear it. I see it online. I try to that's why, especially with my channel, I try to cover everything, because I read everything. I don't, and that may not every book, obviously, I don't have that much time on my hands, but like I read every genre. I read every type of book, because to me, that's what comics is. Comics is it's everything. You know what I mean? Like there's a comic book for every type of reader and every type of fan.
Sure.
And that's why it's my favorite medium. I love TV, I love movies, but comic books is my go-to and always will be. And that's why I love that this kind of book is coming out, because it reminds me of stuff I love. You know what I mean? And like it feels like something familiar yet something new at the same time. And I'm very excited for it to come out. I'm very excited to see the line of books. So
well, I hope you enjoy it, sir. That's what I've always loved about comics too. And a lot of young people who are reading comics right now, you always love the period of comics that you discovered. Okay, whatever comics were when you first discovered comics, that's your wheelhouse for the rest of your life, in my opinion. And it certainly has proven true of me. It's been true of a lot of people I've talked to. And what's interesting to me is that, if you've never read Boys Ranch by Simon and Kirby, which was a Western, if you've never read the romance stories that Simon and Kirby did in the 40s, or the stuff that Marvel was doing in the 60s. I mean, for me, it was this incredible revelation that the team I always wanted to see on Spider-Man was John Buscema penciling and John Romita inking. Do you know where you can see John Buscema penciling and John Romita inking? Quite a bit. On the romance titles that Marvel was doing in the late 60s. And it's as gorgeous as I knew it would be. It's fantastic. But guys like Buscema, Romita, Gene Colan, Don Heck, they were doing beautiful work on these romance comics. And I didn't discover them until they were reprinting them in the mid to late 70s. And as a preteen teenager, I was embarrassed to buy these books, like anybody cared. It was bad enough you were buying a comic book, but you were buying a My Love comic book. It was crazy. It was crazy. But I see people on Facebook and the John Buscema groups in Facebook that are discovering this work that John did, this beautiful work that he did, that were romance comics. So there were romance and mystery and Westerns, and one of the things that I would love to do someday maybe is well, hello, doggy. One of the things I would love to do someday, DeFalco and I had a character we were playing with that would be a superhero Western, and it would be great fun to do something like that at some point, because I grew up watching Bonanza and all those shows. I'd love to do something like that. Not the real gritty, ugly West, but but the West of 60s television.
That would be awesome. I'd love that.
So there's just, you're right. But the genre itself encompasses so many different genres that it is a unique field. Yeah. What kind of dog do you have?
He's a Chihuahua Corgi mix.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he's a talker for sure. That's
wonderful.
That's just him talking out there. Yeah.
Good for you. I just lost my roommate real recently.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, gosh, yeah, she was well, everybody says it, but she was the best cat in the world. She was wonderful, wonderful friend. And yeah, it's tough, but that's what we sign on for when we become pet parents.
That's true. That's the, it's the price we pay for having
Yeah,
having
they fill your heart to the point of bursting, and then at some point they break it, and then you go do it again. For some stupid reason. So,
um,
but that's wonderful. Good.
yeah. Before I let you go though, I just want to ask one last question. I want to ask, besides the new book coming out, is there anything else in the works that you can or can't talk about, or maybe you can tease a little bit? That we can.
Well, actually, working for Binge Books is what I should be doing the most of. I'm also still doing commissions through catskillcomics.com, which is keeping me very, very busy. There, if you want to tease, there is a project that Tom DeFalco and I have been playing with for years that we have finally, it looks like it's going to be published. We've been working behind the scenes to get it polished and get it colored with the help of a couple of different people. And we don't know quite yet how it's going to be presented to the public, but we're very glad that it's finally going to be presented to the public because, not surprisingly, we tend to work alone in our studios and we live for the feedback. I mean, none of these crazy ideas we have are worth anything until they're printed and presented and get feedback from readership. So it's been a frustration of ours that this one concept hasn't seen the light of day, and we're glad that it's finally seeing the light of day. And as soon as I know what's going on, I will be talking about it on my Facebook page. That the main purpose of my Facebook page is to remind people that I'm still alive. And it's been very gratifying, that folks are out there, and I spent a lot of time talking about Heroes Union and letting people know when the pre-order dates were and all that kind of stuff, because I know how hard it is to keep track of this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And so selfishly, I will throw that kind of stuff out there when I know, because I don't want, I wasn't on Facebook when we did the 616 Kevin 5-issue miniseries. If I had been, maybe a few more people that have enjoyed my work in the past would have seen it. I mean, maybe we could have spread the word a little better. So I will occasionally use Facebook for that reason. But for the most part, I talk about ideas we never got around to, and post things, pencils from pieces that you already know, and talk about some of the interaction with the industry and all that kind of stuff, and answer questions and try to interact with people as much as possible. So I've been on it since like 2017, and overall I've really enjoyed it. So you can find me on Facebook. You can find me at catskillcomics.com for commissions and any original art that I may or may not have. Most of it's been picked over at this point. At some point, we will be showing original art from Heroes Union and from the Binge Book publications and stuff. So if you love them and you want a piece of them, there'll be an opportunity for that in the days and weeks and months ahead. But yeah, I really appreciate your spending time talking about this, Ryan. It's been terrific. Thank you.
Oh, I've had a blast, man. Thank you so much for responding to my message. It's always a shot in the dark when I reach out to a creator. I don't know if they're gonna see the message. I don't know if they're gonna respond. So like you responding and you taking time to talk with me, it means a lot. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to just talk comics with you this morning, man. I appreciate it.
Like I said, pardon me, it's one of my favorite subjects, and whenever I can talk to somebody who loves it as much as you do, I mean, it's never less than a pleasure. So thank you very much, man.
Well, awesome. Thank you. And I'll drop the links down below where people can find you online, Catskills Comics, to get the art. And, I definitely would love to do this with you again sometime.
Absolutely. Whenever. You let me know, and I'll be there with bells on, as they used to say.